Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're looking at 3 stories about entitlement to someone's tools, to family property, and to a private beach. Each one shows what happens when someone tries to take what isn't theirs and the person who owns it finally says enough. We'll compare them at the end, so stick around. He wanted to borrow my tile saw but asked my boyfriend instead. I said maybe another man could help. My boyfriend and I have what most people would probably call an untraditional setup, though to us it's just normal. I'm the builder, the fixer, the one who actually knows what to do when something breaks. He's great in 100 other ways, but DIY is not one of them. Over the years, I've collected a garage full of tools, real tools, not bargain bin stuff, power tools, specialty saws, equipment that cost real money and took real time to learn how to use properly. The garage is basically my workshop. It's where I decompress, where I tinker, where half my weekends disappear. We hang out in there a lot, doors open when the weather's nice, music playing, just enjoying the space. I didn't think much of it until the house across the street sold and a young couple moved in. The houses aren't far apart, and I'm sure they'd seen inside our garage more than once while we were working or just relaxing out there. A few weeks after they moved in, the husband came over to introduce himself. He walked up confidently, smiled, and immediately stuck his hand out to my boyfriend. He shook his hand, chatted him up, asked his name, made small talk like they were already buddies. I was standing right there, close enough to be part of the conversation, but he barely glanced at me. I got a quick nod, the kind you give someone you don't really need to acknowledge, and that was it. I brushed it off at first because not every awkward interaction is worth dissecting. He started talking about their house and how it was a fixer-upper. Apparently the previous owner was an elderly woman who'd lived there for over 50 years and the place needed serious work. He mentioned retiling the kitchen, fixing walls, replacing fixtures, the whole deal. He kept addressing my boyfriend even though my boyfriend was clearly just nodding politely and contributing nothing useful. Then he explained that money was tight after buying the house, so he'd be doing most of the repairs himself and learning as he goes. That's when it started to click where this was heading. He talked about YouTube videos, trial and error, and how stressful it was to figure everything out without experience. My boyfriend smiled awkwardly because he hates DIY with a passion and had no idea what to say. Finally, the guy got to the point. He asked my boyfriend if he could borrow his tile saw and maybe a few other tools. He said it casually, like this was a totally normal neighborly request. He even sweetened the deal by offering to return everything in perfect condition and buy a case of beer for the trouble. The confidence with which he said it was honestly impressive considering he was asking someone he barely knew to hand over expensive equipment. That's when my boyfriend spoke up and said, "Oh, those are actually her tools," he gestured toward me. "I don't know how to build or fix anything. She's the one who does all that." The guy looked genuinely surprised, like someone had just flipped the script on him mid-scene. He paused, then gave me a half smile that felt more obligatory than respectful. "Oh," he said, "I guess I should have asked you then. What do you say? Offer still stands." Something about that moment really rubbed me the wrong way. There was no apology, no acknowledgement. He dismissed me from the start, no recognition that he just assumed the tools belonged to the man standing next to me. It was like he was just adjusting his target, not his attitude. So instead of smoothing it over, I let my annoyance show. I told him maybe another man in the neighborhood could help him out because I'm just a woman, and what would I know about tools anyway? I kept my tone light, but the sarcasm was unmistakable. His expression shifted immediately, like he'd finally realized he'd stepped into something uncomfortable. He laughed awkwardly, muttered something about not meaning it that way, and said he'd figure something else out. Your boyfriend's correction was the first twist. It shattered the neighbor's fantasy of a classic male homeowner to borrow from. But the real kicker was the neighbor's reaction. He didn't miss a beat. He just turned to you. "Oh, I guess I should have asked you then." It wasn't an apology, it was a correction. That right there showed his real attitude. After he left, my boyfriend told me I might have been a little harsh. He didn't think the guy meant any harm and felt like I'd gone straight for the throat. I told him that harm doesn't have to be intentional to be irritating. The assumption was still there, loud and clear. The fact that he felt comfortable asking to borrow a tile saw from someone he'd just met without even acknowledging the actual owner was wild to me. This isn't a one-off experience either. It happens often enough to be exhausting. Men assume my boyfriend handles the man stuff and I'm just along for the ride. They ask him questions, seek his approval, and treat me like an accessory until corrected. I don't mind educating people when it's genuine confusion, but this wasn't that. This was entitlement layered on top of a lazy stereotype. And honestly, the audacity of the request itself still makes me laugh. Tile saws aren't cheap. The one I own costs more than most people's monthly car payments. It's not something you lend out casually, especially not to someone who openly admits they're inexperienced and learning off YouTube. Beer doesn't replace broken equipment. And I'll be careful doesn't mean much when you don't know what you're doing. A few days later, I saw him struggling with a cheap rental saw in his driveway, clearly frustrated and very much out of his depth. I didn't gloat, but I also didn't offer help. He didn't wave, didn't come over, didn't ask again. The dynamic shifted, and I was completely fine with that. Cordial distance beats entitled familiarity every time. I'm not obligated to lend my tools, my skills, or my time to someone who couldn't be bothered to treat me like an equal from the start. If that makes me the unfriendly neighbor, so be it. I'd rather be known as the woman with boundaries than the one whose garage gets raided because someone assumed she wouldn't say no. And just for the record, if you're bold enough to ask a stranger for their tile saw, you should probably be bold enough to look at the right person when you do it. And our second story. She took advantage of our parents' move to steal autographed sports memorabilia. A few years ago, my mom and stepdad were getting ready to move, and it was one of those stressful emotional transitions that seems simple on paper, but turns into a mess the moment boxes come out. My stepdad was in physical rehab at the time after a serious medical issue, so he couldn't lift, sort, or really help with much beyond pointing and giving instructions. That left my mom, me, and my siblings doing most of the packing. One important detail is that my stepdad had spent decades collecting autographed memorabilia. Not cheap knockoff stuff either. I'm talking authenticated pieces from names people actually recognize. Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, Jeff Gordon, Tom Brady, and a handful of others. These weren't decorations he picked up on a whim. Some were gifts, some were carefully tracked down over years, and all of them mattered deeply to him. They weren't just things, they were pride items, history, memories. While we were packing, my sister showed up a few times. At the time, nothing felt off. She helped a bit, wandered around a lot, and mostly acted like she was there to support Mom. We didn't inventory every single item as it went into boxes because, frankly, we didn't think we had to. This was family. That assumption turned out to be expensive. A few weeks after the move, my mom realized several memorabilia pieces were missing. At first, she thought they'd been misplaced or packed into the wrong box. We checked storage, closets, and even the moving truck records. Nothing. That's when it clicked that my sister had taken them. Not borrowed, taken. When my mom confronted her, my sister didn't deny it. She just brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal. She claimed she thought they wouldn't miss them or that she was keeping them safe. My mom was devastated, but also exhausted. Between my stepdad's rehab, the move, and everything else going on, she didn't have the emotional bandwidth for a fight. She said something that stuck with me to this day. If those things mean more to her than her relationship with us, then I guess that tells me what I need to know. So she let it go. No police report, no lawyers, just quiet heartbreak and disappointment. The moment your mom realized the items were gone, your sister didn't even bother denying it. She just shrugged it off. That was her first power play, betting that your mom's exhaustion and heartbreak would be stronger than her anger. And she was right, for years. Fast forward to recently, out of nowhere, my sister put her house up for sale. Along with the listing, she advertised a big yard sale to declutter before moving. I wasn't planning to go anywhere near it until I saw the photos she posted online. And there they were, clear as day, several of my parents' items sitting on folding tables like bargain bin junk. I don't think I've ever gone from calm to furious that fast. I didn't call ahead, I didn't text, I just got in my car and drove over. When I pulled up, she was already set up, smiling, chatting with people, acting like everything on those tables belonged to her. I walked straight up, didn't bother with pleasantries, and said, "Hey, I'm here to pick up Mom's things." She froze, then she laughed like I was joking. I started loading the items into my car without asking permission. Framed pieces, signed balls, memorabilia she had no right to even touch. She followed me, yelling that I couldn't do that I was stealing from her, that she'd call the cops. I looked her dead in the face and said, "Please do. You'll have to explain how you stole them from Mom and Stepdad in the first place." That shut her up for about half a second. Then she went nuclear, screaming, calling me names, threatening lawsuits, telling neighbors I was robbing her. At that point, I snapped and told her exactly what she was, a thief who took advantage of our parents while they were vulnerable. I didn't sugarcoat it, I didn't lower my voice, and I didn't stop loading the car. True to her word, she called the police. By the time I was pulling out of her driveway, I didn't even care anymore. Let her call, let her explain. I drove straight to my parents' house and unloaded everything back where it belonged. My stepdad didn't say much when he saw the items again. He just stared at them for a long moment and then quietly said, "Thank you." That alone made the entire confrontation worth it. About an hour later, I got a call from the police. The officer was calm and professional. He asked for my side of the story, so I explained everything. How the items went missing during the move, how my sister admitted taking them, how they belonged to my parents, and how she was now trying to sell them. The officer told me it was considered a civil matter, but added something interesting. If my sister wanted to push it, my parents would have grounds to pursue charges for theft. That was the end of it. She never took it to court. She never called again. She never apologized either. But the memorabilia stayed where it belonged. And that was all that mattered. My parents finally had closure, and my sister learned, at least temporarily, that just because you're family doesn't mean you get a free pass to steal. The irony is that if she had just asked, if she'd been honest, or if she'd shown even a shred of remorse, things might have gone differently. Instead, she treated priceless family items like yard sale filler and acted shocked when someone finally pushed back. I don't regret what I did, not even a little. Sometimes being the bigger person just means letting people walk all over you. And sometimes the right move is loading stolen property into your car, daring the thief to call the cops, and driving away without looking back. The victory wasn't just getting the stuff back. It was the silence that followed. No lawsuit, no more calls, no drama. Just your stepdad quietly saying thank you and the items being home. You didn't get an apology or fix the relationship, but you stopped the theft and gave your parents closure. That's a cleaner win than any family therapy could have been. And our last story. The previous owners gave up fighting trespassers on their private beach. I didn't. I spent more than 30 years working, saving, and investing with one goal in mind, owning a piece of property on the beach. Not a condo with a shared entrance, not a timeshare, not a technically near the ocean place with public foot traffic running past the front door. I wanted a home where the sand, the water, and the quiet were mine, where I could sit outside and hear waves instead of strangers' conversations. When I finally bought the property, it felt unreal. The house sits just back from the shoreline with the beach stretching south of it. It's beautiful, peaceful, and most importantly, private. The property is accessed by a private road, not a public street. When you turn onto that road, there's a large, unmistakable sign posted at the entrance that reads, "No beach access." Not small lettering, not ambiguous wording, big, clear, impossible to miss. At least it should have been impossible to miss. I learned very quickly that plenty of people simply chose to ignore it. Apparently, over the years, people had gotten into the habit of driving down the private road, parking near my house, and wandering onto the beach as if it were public land. They brought picnic coolers. They let their dogs run loose. They loitered. Some played music, others set up chairs and umbrellas. A few even treated the area like a social gathering spot, waving to each other like they discovered some secret community beach. They acted like they belonged there. I didn't buy the property to be a villain or a gatekeeper. I bought it because I wanted peace. I pay substantial taxes on that land, including the sand itself. According to the law, the beach south of my house is mine. It's not a gray area. It's not kind of private. It's private property, full stop. Still, when I first started seeing people down there, I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't realize. Maybe they followed someone else. Maybe they thought the sign didn't apply to them. I politely informed people that the beach was private and asked them to leave. The reactions were enlightening. Some people apologized and left without issue, but a surprising number argued. They insisted beaches were always public. They told me I couldn't possibly own sand. A few claimed they'd been coming here for years. One person actually laughed and asked me what I was going to do about it. That's when I started asking questions of my own. I spoke with neighbors, I researched property records, I dug into the history of the land. What I found explained everything. About 20 years earlier, the previous owners had tried to enforce the same boundaries. They put up signs, they even tried fencing in some areas. And what happened? People tore the signs down, over and over. According to long-term residents, these weren't troublemakers or vandals in the traditional sense. These were respectable locals, families, dog walkers, people who felt entitled because they'd always done it. When confronted, they simply removed whatever obstacle stood in their way. Eventually, the owners gave up, not because they were wrong, but because they didn't live nearby and couldn't constantly monitor the property. The beach slowly became public by default. I wasn't willing to accept that. I didn't spend 3 decades working toward this goal just to surrender it to strangers who thought rules only applied when convenient, but I also knew better than to handle it emotionally. This wasn't going to be solved by shouting matches or confrontations. It had to be done the right way, the legal way. Your research uncovered the real problem, a broken tradition. The previous owners didn't lose the legal fight, they lost the war of persistence. They were absentee landlords fighting a daily battle against locals who had time and a sense of ownership on their side. Their retreat's what created the myth that this beach was free for the taking. You moved in as a permanent resident, and that changed everything. So I started documenting everything. I installed cameras at the entrance to the private road and near the access point to the beach. I recorded license plates. I saved footage of people passing the sign, parking, and setting up as if they owned the place. I kept a log of dates, times, and interactions. I took photos of torn down signs when it happened, which unsurprisingly it did. Then I spoke with a property attorney. He confirmed what I already knew. The land was mine, and I was well within my rights to restrict access. He also confirmed something else. Allowing people to continue using the beach without challenge could eventually create legal problems. In some cases, long-term, unchallenged access can turn into claims of implied permission. In other words, doing nothing was the worst option. With his guidance, I did things properly. New signs went up, professionally made, mounted securely with clear language citing private property and no trespassing. I added a gate to the private road with access limited to residents and authorized visitors. I coordinated with local law enforcement so they were aware of the situation and the boundaries. The reaction was immediate. People complained, some tried to argue again, a few attempted to move the signs. One group even tried to claim they'd spoken to the owner and had permission, which was impressive considering I was standing right there. That's when consequences began. I stopped asking, I started enforcing. When people ignored the signs and entered anyway, I called it in. Trespassing warnings were issued, repeat offenders were cited. Once word spread that enforcement was real and not just empty threats, the crowds thinned quickly. Within months, the beach was quiet. No picnics, no dogs running loose, no strangers setting up chairs next to my home. Just sand, water, and the sound of waves. Exactly what I'd worked so long for. Every now and then, someone new tries. They drive past the sign, assuming it doesn't apply to them. They usually don't last long. Peace, I learned, isn't something you're given. When you step back and look at these 3 stories together, what stands out isn't just entitlement, it's misplaced confidence. In the first story, the neighbor wasn't just dismissive, he was certain. Certain that tools belonged to the man. Certain that asking casually made it acceptable. Certain that adjusting who he asked was the same thing as showing respect. That confidence evaporated the moment his assumption was called out. In the second story, entitlement hid behind family. Your sister assumed proximity and blood gave her access to things that weren't hers, especially when your parents were vulnerable. She didn't deny it because she didn't think she needed to. Silence had protected her for years, until it didn't. And in the final story, entitlement scaled up to an entire community. Decades of ignored boundaries turned into a shared fantasy. If enough people benefit, ownership stops mattering. What broke that illusion wasn't anger or confrontation, it was persistence, documentation, and enforcement that didn't blink. All 3 stories end the same way. Confidence collapses when it meets someone who won't absorb the cost anymore. And thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.